Kenneth here. Just starting spring work on whatever trees I can get my hands on. We have here today is a mountain hemlock collected by Anton, presumably somewhere on Vancouver Island, though I'm not positive. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to check out what he does and maybe purchase some trees yourself. Anyways, I've had this since May of 2020. And I've been really looking forward to working on it. Would have worked on it in the fall, but life was super busy and I prioritized some other hemlocks and a few other trees. But here we are now. It's a great time to work on it, assuming I can protect it from the really cold nights. Like a light freeze, that's all well and good, which we're going to get. But if we start dipping down to, you know, minus 3, minus 4 and lower Celsius, then I'm going to put it in the greenhouse. So for today, it's all about picking a front and wiring out these branches. So in terms of aesthetics with this tree and kind of the direction I want to bring the style is it's going to be a little unorthodox. And it's not necessarily going to resemble a real tree that you might find you know, growing in old growth hemlock forests or on a lonely hillside or something in the mountains. It's going to be fairly abstract and it's going to feel like a bonsai, but it's going to be unconventional enough that it should be interesting to just watch and follow, because it does have a really interesting trunk line. Even at the angle it's at now, while my eye is not perfect, you could still make a really interesting tree out of this. Almost undoubtedly you'd be using this first branch here, which I'm sure is hard to see. We'll get a close-up shot of that. You'd be using this in a direction counter to the direction in the trunk line. And probably same thing with the apex. You'd want to be fighting the direction of the trunk line because there are no roots on this side of the tree. It was likely growing at an even further tilted angle and maybe back a little bit. If I recall, it came out of like a wetland kind of area. It wasn't out of granite, it was out of muck. I could be wrong. Anyways, so that's part of what we're going to try to balance, is that instability in the base, the fact that all the rooting is only on one side. We're going to tilt it up a little bit further to help counter that, and then we're going to use the directionality of both the foliage and the apex to make up for it. You might say, well, why not just bring the tree that direction and have you know, all components kind of working with each other and have the roots actually gain stability moving that way? And the answer to that is all my roots are on the top side here, and if I go and tilt this thing too far that way, all my fine roots are going to be sticking up out of the container. As you can see here, most of the roots are kind of isolated on this side of the trunk, and there's really nothing down here unless you start digging down real low, and it's just stuff crossing back from this side, moving that way. So that does somewhat limit what I can do with establishing a new angle for the design of the tree. But honestly, it's nothing too crazy. All it really does is informs my limits. Incredible how difficult it is to see the tree. Just such thick foliage. I'll bring her back a bit. Hard to see. But we get this incredible drop branch there. And I'll rotate around to the back. Yeah. Incredible tree. There is some root work going to be needed to bring them down, but given my ability and what I've encountered with other hemlocks that I've worked on from Anton's, I don't want to push the roots quite that far. So yeah, I've already gone over a bunch of possible fronts. They all kind of had merit. and they all would have presented different kind of finished results and different challenges while styling. But I'll save the one that I'm going to go for last, and we'll kind of walk through the ones that I decided not to go with. Either way, beautiful tree, and I'm looking forward to getting to work on it. Yeah, expecting the tree to ever end up in a reasonable container at this angle, I just don't think is really all that realistic. See the base coming up there. Pretty good view of that drop branch. It's almost going straight down. Not quite though. There might be a subtle angle change to fix that. And then coming in to the upper portion of the tree, past that gin, around the back, and you can see up into the confusion. That's the apex at the moment. Yeah, honestly, this would be a beautiful front. Maybe one day it will be. So this is another view I considered, and I do quite like. The container is tilted much less aggressively. Basically, since it's hard to see from this front angle, but the final container would go there. So we're talking that much root to not cut, but to kind of comb out and layer down. Really quite reasonable. Even if most of the roots are contained up there, still easy to bring down. Pros to this: base is quite good, quite stable. Trunk line, again, nice lines, avoiding really horizontal, really vertical lines, keeping the movement dynamic and interesting. And here we get a view of this deadwood. The crown is moving towards us. We get a great view of that. It's honestly quite nice. A con that would be easy to fix is this first primary branch. While I do like the angle that we get to see where it originates, it is moving quite backwards, but with guy wires, easy to move. The only other con I'd say with this, and what ultimately dissuaded me from using it, was that lack of that interesting deadwood with that crazy sharp turning in it, and the sudden angle changes in it, and that really interesting kind of claw look that it had. We really don't get it. We kind of just get a flat plane of deadwood right here, and a few deadwood stubs, a few gins that, they look good, but some of them are quite thin, so they might not be that long lasting. And generally, just compared to the deadwood that we have on the other side, it's not as good. Even on this branch, if we can move it a bit, we're still going to lose a. Pardon me. We're still going to lose out on a part of that. But yeah, as I'm styling this, like, from the front that I did ultimately go with, this is going to be the back, and it's super easy just to flip the tree around occasionally and appreciate it from this angle. There'll be a few decisions that, when viewing it from here, might look a little strange, being that it wasn't styled as the front. It'll still be quite beautiful, and that's kind of part of trees, is you rotate them through the growing season, right? So you have to get used to seeing it on the back side, and it is nice when that back side is actually pleasant to look at, and the branches aren't just really superficially whipped right around. You can see these big awkward bends, crossing branches just to get the foliage where you want it from the front. Sometimes it happens, and that's all well and good, but I think on this tree we can avoid that and still have this backside to appreciate from time to time. But for display purposes, as you'll see, the front side will be our primary and most beautiful and enjoyable side. We'll head there next. All right. So here we are at the angle that I decided to go with. I thought it kind of brought together the best of all angles. Really hard to stray away from that first angle change, but honestly, this one's really quite good. We get the best view of the interesting deadwood here. A little bit of a view of the stuff in the back. I suspect that'll be mostly obscured, but it's worth noting. Good movement of the trunk from this angle. It may seem a little strange that we wouldn't want to rotate it and have the base this whole plane, but since the primary roots, and they are quite large, are both heading this way, this will actually end up being the wider, kind of more stable and powerful base. Plus, it'll be interesting. It'll kind of have some verticality, some rise to it to kind of match the thematic of the rest of the tree. Despite a few downward bits, the main trunk is just rising, whatever way it can find, and the base is going to reflect that. We get, albeit a bit of an unorthodox, but a good view of this first primary, right? It's unfortunate that there's not more of a space between the trunk and the branch, but honestly, it might end up being more interesting. It kind of breaks up that the trunk line a bit, and you don't see that often. Now, as I discussed before, it's going to be styled in a way that the primary branch and the apex are both moving one direction, with the majority of the trunk obviously moving in the other. That's to add some visual interest and also to compensate, again, for this base. If I had it in me to try to bring this way under here, which you could do, and then again have the apex also moving this way, I don't think it would feel all that stable. I could even maybe have this branch coming this way. It'd highlight the deadwood quite well, and then have the only component of the tree that is moving against that being the apex. But honestly, I really do like the idea of this branch being layered in such a way that it both frames this and breaks up this trunk line a little bit. Because there is a little bit of inverse taper here and there. It is a little bit stale in the sense that it's almost the same diameter all the way up until the major elbows. I think it's beautiful, but if we can disguise from that, it'll make the tree a little easier to view. One con from this side is, as it stands now, the apex is moving pretty far backwards. It's for now is a problem, but over time I think it'll be a wonderful thing for the tree, just having another change in direction, swooping back and then swooping forward again. It also makes it easier to establish some background pieces, being we have the primary branching heading back there. We'll have something taken from here and brought over there, taken from here, and probably, at least in part, kept above this. Maybe there'll be a piece there. We'll see about that. Either way, I'm really excited to get started. So enough introduction to the tree, and let's get going. All right, so here we are. Tree's finished. I could spend more time fine tweaking things, applying more fine wire, doing some more fine pruning. I'm going to leave it alone for now. I have removed a lot of foliage and done a lot of heavy bends. I'd rather not further stress out the tree by going that extra step that might, not really change much in terms of aesthetic, but could damage the tree and slow down its development. So we did a pretty major guy wire bend here. I used a turnbuckle to gain the strength, because by myself I couldn't hold the branch and twist the wires in this really awkward spot down here. It's just looped around a dead root, pretty thick one. Too awkward to get in there, so the turnbuckle helped me out a lot. I'll leave that on. If it looks like it's damaging the turnbuckle or rusting or something, I could just replace it with a straight wire all the way down. I'll leave it on for now. In terms of the front, it's more or less that third option that we went over, with a little bit of a twist. I think that would be clockwise, and then a little bit of a more forward inclination. So it kind of sits somewhere between the first angle change and the third angle change. I did this because, honestly, the movement just felt a little better. You still get a little forward and back undulation, not as much as was there before, but more importantly, we get a little bit of negative space in here, and we get plenty of negative space in there. I like that little peekaboo in there. I thought that was important to try to keep from the front. Where else do we go with this? There are quite a few redundant branches throughout. I wanted to keep more on for the first styling than ultimately we would need. Some of these include, but are definitely not limited to, this branch here. I was trying to bend this branch further down, but it was threatening to separate at the crotch here. So it's kind of got this little awkward upward bend. I'm not a big fan of that. I'd rather have the consistency with most things either flat or down on a tree like this. That's okay though, because eventually, after this, there's plenty of time to thicken up and elongate, and I can prune and wire more kind of visual interest into it, more bits of movement, tighter bends, blah, blah, blah. I can then kill it off and turn it into a gin that kind of coincides with this one right here. I think that would be really nice. Another redundant branch, probably this one in here. I know it looks important now, but as things elongate from up top and I bring those further down, I think that'll suit the tree a little better. Generally, this tree needs a lot more downward facing branches. I just didn't have the length to go about doing that. If I did, this thing would have been super narrow, and it's already quite narrow. So as these elongate, I'll decide which ones are thick enough at what point in time, and which ones are redundant enough at one point in time, and I'll kill them off. I'll turn them into interesting gins, and it'll kind of add a little bit more visual consistency and interest to the entire tree. One thing I'll get a close-up shot of is this branch right here. It already had this kind of awkward looping back nature to it. Normally you would just prune it off, but I'm considering approach grafting that onto the primary structure of the branch a little further back to give us branch there, because I'm never going to get a bud growing there, and as a little experiment to see whether approach grafts on mountain hemlocks take. I don't know. I haven't researched it. I'm sure I could reach out to a professional that might have the answer. Somebody who works with hemlocks a lot, maybe Michael. Another branch that could be removed, I don't know, is some of this lower stuff and maybe shortened. I kind of like that it breaks up the trunk here. I haven't sat with it long enough to figure out whether I want it to stay that way. But pretty cool if it did elongate, thicken, and then eventually be killed off one day and we get an interesting gin there. I think we can move on past that and into the upper crown. On camera, it really does look like there's a lot more messiness in here than there is in person. Just these tiny little branchlets with a bit of an upward inclination really muddle it, but I want to keep them on because as they elongate, a little bit more weight on the tips, and they will elongate because now they have lots of sun and priority. They'll bring themselves down a little bit naturally. Didn't want to apply wire. Again, could have, but didn't really seem worth it. Just more hands in there, possibly crushing needles, bumping into things. I just didn't want to bother with that. As with branches out here, I want to get elongating, thickening here to 1, kill gins, and 2, be able to drop these branches further and further down to stay consistent with this. So it would be really nice to see, even just in the short term, this branch here elongate quite a bit. Maybe even more, right? Again, I can't see that from your angle, but it could be broken up into further parts too. Maybe it's something like that. Maybe it's something like that. I don't know. I'll kind of roll the punches, see what the tree gives me, but I would like a bit more growth out here. Another thing I could do, and it would feel very bonsai-like, to let some elongation happen here. Just have a little peekaboo branch or two back here to stop your eye from traveling straight through, because there's nothing but negative space over here. I like that. I think it's really unique, but it would feel quite comfortable having a tree that did something like probably that. I can't, again, I can't see it from your angle. It would likely be something like that. I mean, as this goes out, it can elongate and drop more too. It could end up even all the way down there. I think that would maybe muddle up the silhouette of this front branch. So likely don't want to do that, but we're at least gonna try a little peekaboo branch there. Generally, the tree overall does need to develop some more density. There's a few dense areas, but for the most part, I want the whole thing to become much more green, much more full. If we look in the before picture, you'll see way more density. The tree feels darker, kind of in a good way though. Like it feels more lush and full. There's a lot of light escaping through it right now, and it's nice to enjoy that for what it's worth while it's like that. But ultimately, hemlock are dense, deep trees. The foliage becomes almost cloud-like over time. Just it's just subtle breaks between everything. A little bit of rise out on the branch tips so you can see the kind of underside structure, but just barely. They become beautiful as they mature. But for now, we'll enjoy it for kind of how it is as a first styling. I'll do a little 360 here. We'll see whether or not I actually end up on the same front once it's spun all the way around. But there's some good angles to view the tree. I mean, from here, it's obviously moving quite far away. But you get some nice views. Yeah, you can see some of the kind of superficial work I did here. I just left a lot of green on it. You can barely see it from the front. And the more green I leave on it now, the more quickly it's going to recover. So I'm fine with how this backside looks. It doesn't look terrible, but probably somewhere from where you are now, you can't see the base whatsoever. It's a good base. After this is worked down a bit, you'll have a really beautiful view. You get a beautiful view of this drop branch. The apex is kind of awkwardly, the top's moving away, but this section's moving towards you. I like that. But the deadwood's just not as good. Pardon me if I'm going slow. It's a little unstable on the turntable. When I was styling the tree, it was just sitting flat on the bench. We're probably somewhere in there again. And yeah, that's the tree. I get to move on after this to some large work, a little bit of deciduous stuff coming up in the next week. I got a pretty major pine to work on. It's worth mentioning too. One of the reasons I really wanted to tackle this tree now as opposed to fall, of course, was so I could get to repotting sooner when that time comes. But also, I can't necessarily confirm this, but a few of my hemlocks, they're prone to shedding really big plates of bark, especially lower down on the trunk. You can see this one. It was like this when I received it, but there's quite a bit of the older bark missing down there. Now it could have been like that from collection, just the way it was laying down, because I think this tree was laying down quite a bit. Or it could have happened since then. I don't know. But as the tree thickens, and it sure as heck will, if it's got that kind of robust growth on it year after year after year after year, it can kind of revert to a younger state in the sense that it just starts shedding and kicking off all that like craggy and rich and beautiful bark, because the bark doesn't expand very well. It's dead tissue. It's not meant to swell like that and hold itself on. So by doing this pruning now, we get to slow it down a little bit. So we're not risking this massive expansion where the bark can't keep up and then it wants to flake off. I know some other people have talked about this. I can't confirm that's what's been happening or whether or not that really affects hemlocks at all. I've heard it talked about on pines mostly, but just another reason to actually get going on the styling. If the tree's healthy and it's ready for it, just put the hours into it. It's always worth it. It's a lot more fun working on a tree than just watching it on your bench grow and grow and grow and grow and grow, and kind of get further and further and further away from what you saw in that tree when you purchased it, right? Yeah, thanks for tuning in. Thank you, Chris, for letting me host a video on your channel. I may or may not have my channel up and running by the time this goes live. If I do, there'll be a link in the description along with a link to Anton's blog if you're interested in more trees that he's collected and kind of his approach. And yeah, feel free to check back. And once again, thanks for watching. Thanks for watching, guys. See you in the next one.